the time of the Marikana tragedy, at the mine, that mine was owned by Lonmin, of which Cyril Ramaphosa was a director and minority shareholder, I should say. Now, in 2019, the company was bought by Sibanye-Stillwater. Despite the millions being spent on a commission of inquiry, not a single person has been charged for the killings. Since the massacre, the government has paid just over 70 million rand to affected families and victims. However, many are still desperate to hold someone accountable, and many want Ramaphosa or the mining house to take responsibility. For this conversation, I'm joined by the Executive Director for the Institute of Social Dialogue. That's John Capel, who speaks to us from Johannesburg. Mr. Capel, thank you very much for your time. As we open this conversation, I'd like to quickly give you a bit of what David Funvik had to say. He's a man that you would have worked with closely during your time at the Benchmarks Foundation. And this is based on the article that you wrote in the Sunday Times. Let's just have a listen to what David Funvik told us on Sunday.
Mr. Capel was the Executive Director of the Benchmarks Foundation for the whole time that I was there between 2007 until last year. And I must also be honest with you, Mr. Capel has never been out in the field with me except for 2 occasions during a tenure of almost 16 years of working at Benchmarks Foundation. So all the field work was left to community monitors, to myself as the lead researcher, and to the research department itself. It is very sad to see that, once one starts getting an income from a big corporation, you start singing from the hymn book because they put the food on your table. You know, the Benchmarks Foundation doesn't take any money from corporations or mining companies. Our money essentially comes from church organizations all over the world and in South Africa itself, and we are associated with the South African Council of Churches. So I would contest every one of those points, and I would like to invite him to come with me to Marikana, the real Marikana, not these far-flung sections which are miles and miles away from where the massacre took place. Sure. Now, when we talk about the monument and the Wall of Remembrance, the Wall of Remembrance is not actually at the Kopi. It's not actually at the hill where people were shot. It is far away. It is at a village, a security village, where the security companies operated from that participated in the massacre, which now house the widows of the workers that were killed. And, you know, it is a complex that actually cuts off those widows from the public and cuts them off from anyone who would like to find out exactly what their situation as the widows are. Now, Mr. Capel was with me in a discussion with Lonmin immediately after the massacre with the Norwegian Development Minister. And at the time, we said to them, we don't think that it's ethical or moral to give jobs to the widows in the place where their husbands perished. Yeah. In fact, the widows should have been compensated for the loss of income from their breadwinners for the entire lifespan of that breadwinner right through to retirement and pension as well, rather than putting them underground under those appalling conditions in which mine workers have to work.
Sure. So, in short, John Capel is singing for his supper, is what you're saying.
It's exactly what I'm saying.
John Capel, that's the conversation I had with David Funvik. And in essence, the context here is that he is disputing what you say has been a bit of development in Marikana through your article. How do you respond?
Well, I mean, I think there's 2 things I must say. That as part of that article, given the history of Lonmin, Lonro, and what a despicable company they were, their history as the London Mine and Rhodesian Company, what Prime Minister Edward Heath said about them in 1973, that they were the unacceptable face, the unpleasant and unacceptable face of capitalism. And he said this in the House of Commons. And I'm indicating in that article that this culture displayed itself on August the 16th, 2012. And I was very close to Marikana and what has happened, and I've been there many times. And then, so I deal with that. And then in the article I say that Sibanye-Stillwater face huge challenges. One is that justice needs to be done, that justice needs to be done by the company. I talk about compensation for the victims of the Marikana massacre. I talk about compensation for the injured mine workers, and I say that Sibanye have come in the last 3 years, also during the period of COVID, that they learned some lessons by buying Stillwater in the USA about what is called the Good Neighbor Agreement. After many battles with communities, they arrived at some kind of social compact for joint decision-making processes. And so I think I'm quoted a bit out of tune there. Then when it comes to that I'm singing for my supper, well, in Benchmarks Foundation, when I was the executive director, I was promoting what we called the Independent Capacity Building Fund, which I said the industry had to pay for, to give communities capacity to engage around, say, environmental plans, to engage around, or environmental impacts, to engage around social and labour plans for development, for a whole number of purposes, and had to also support what I call the independent grievance mechanism and find ways to resolve problems in a non-adversarial way.
Yeah.
And really, a lot of these ideas now form the backbone of the Institute for Social Dialogue. And this idea really arises from that we don't have social dialogue in the country. We don't know how to talk to each other. And the Institute has a bottom-up approach. It's not a top-down approach. It sits in between, I would say, the mining industry and communities to facilitate engagements and empower communities to sit around the table as equals. And I think the central tenet of it is dialoguing as equals. And yes, right. I've received seed money from Sibanye-Stillwater, but it has an independent board and is independent of Sibanye.
Yeah.
That is critical. For its workings.
It's important, John, that indeed that particular aspect comes out clear. And I'm glad you mentioned it, that for you to start what you now run, which is the Institute for Social Dialogue, you did receive seed money from Sibanye-Stillwater, which has taken over from Lonmin. But the important element here is what David Funvik is arguing, and is arguing against your points that you have written in that article. And they are as follows, if I could quickly read them for you. You said that as per development in Marikana, which was done by Sibanye-Stillwater, that company has initiated what is called the Marikana Renewal Program with a strong focus on surrounding communities. It's established a wall of remembrance with the names of the deceased. Food security in the form of home gardens has been established, and this also includes money that has been made available to convert certain facilities into economic hubs. And you've heard him say, David Funvik, that not a single one of these points has actually come to fruition. If you look, for example, at the Wall of Remembrance, are you aware of the dispute around that, where you say this Wall of Remembrance has been erected? Indeed it has, but it's in a wrong place. Do you acknowledge that?
I think, yes, it should probably be at the Kopi, but it's not also where David Funvik says it is. It's much nearer the Marikana operations, so he gets that point wrong. but I don't really want to get into debate about that. What I do say in my article, and in the longer version on the net, what I do say is they've initiated, and that Sibanye, using the Good Neighbor Agreement, in a sense, have initiated the Marikana renewal process. And they've started off, yes, with food gardens, but they have much bigger plans, and these plans run over many, many years. And it's not easy, I suspect, to turn around something like Marikana in a very short period of time that they've been in power. And I say that they're a new broker. So this must be, taken into context, that they're a new broker. They weren't involved in the Marikana massacre. They have an opportunity to do some good, and I call on them to do this good. I also call on them to compensate the victims of the Marikana massacre, the widows and the orphans, as well as those injured workers, to call on the state to hold to account the police officers involved in the massacre, and so it's it's not exactly true what he's saying.
Yeah.
I haven't changed as a person. I know I very much set the narrative around Marikana. For many years, I was the only one in Benchmarks involved in the issues around Marikana, and it's only recently, really, that other people in Benchmarks have been getting involved in and around the area. So I'm saying that there's a foundation being built by Sibanye, and in the web article it will say only time will tell, and that they are going to be measured against whether they can uplift these communities, whether they can bring justice to the victims of the massacre. And I say this is the true measurement that's going to measure them. I'm not saying they've achieved all of these things. So I think, it's taken a bit out of context.
All right. Okay. A foundation has been set. John Capel, thank you very much for your time. He leads the Institute for Social Dialogue, clarifying his article there.